I'm an old guy. I go back. I started under Gerald Ford in '76 with URDA. Any of you remember URDA?
Yeah.
And if I remember right, my memory is fading in these days. In '76 to 1976 through '78. There was a lot of concern about proliferation, as Zach's presentation highlighted this morning, especially with regards to, if I remember right, Korea, Pakistan, French efforts to transfer reprocessing technology, et cetera. So that whole environment was critical to creating not only the Nonproliferation Act, but also the interest in non-nuclear alternatives that was incorporated into Title V. And actually, you also remember the Department of Energy was created in '77, October '77. Okay, and at that time, we were working with Argonne National Laboratory and others in developing a non-nuclear alternatives assessment program. And I think, I'm trying to remember exactly which countries we did. I know we did Korea. I was trying to find it on the website, but I couldn't find the old report.
It would be fascinating to see how someone actually responded to the legal request.
and so, I think that, so there was that period of time where, in a sense, there was a lot of attention, not only in DOE, but I think overall in terms of how to keep countries from pursuing the spread of nuclear technologies in the commercial sense. And, but then, of course, emphasis changed. And the foreign policy aspect has been very important in terms of its influence on the direction and objectives of our international energy cooperation and assistance efforts. And everything from OPEC, the desire to develop alternatives to OPEC supply, and this was true in the late '70s and '80s. Of course, the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan that led to our big programs that I was involved in the '80s in Pakistan. The whole question of energy security in Eastern Europe and Russia, and how to develop and help countries with their energy security needs, wars in the Balkans. And so you've had assistance that has been very much influenced by broader foreign policy factors over the years. We've had a program in non-nuclear energy cooperation for many years with aid, and particularly aid at State Department and DOE in the early years, and that has expanded over time. So let me see, just hit the main button.
Hit the
right button?
Yes.
So, in a sense, Title V was authorized a program to help developing countries meet their needs. We used non-nuclear. There was also a strong emphasis at that time under Jimmy Carter, Solar Energy Initiative that I helped to write, and way before times. In the G7, we had a renewable energy initiative.
Not way before. That's why we have it now, because of what you did.
and so so Title V was sort of a prelude to this, but it was never funded, and it talked about authorizing money in the DOE account to do international. But the administration, and it was interesting going back and looking at some of the old reports by the GAO and the Comptroller General, was, that at that time, the basic philosophy was that assistance was AID. It was not domestic agencies. Okay, and OMB was pretty strict on that in those days. And so it was never, the title was never specifically funded, and DOE wasn't authorized to do that. But we had AID. I did a lot of programs with the laboratories from AID where we passed money to DOE to do work in India and different countries. Okay, so, and obviously as this strategy has evolved, this is some of the things I mentioned already with regards to the program. Interesting that there was a strong emphasis on solar and renewables ahead of its time. And of course at that time we were concerned about our dependence on oil, right, in terms of OPEC power, et cetera. So that was a big factor. I worked with Schlesinger, and that was one of the key things that we did from a strategic standpoint, is try to get World Bank, others to finance petroleum development. Okay, well, things obviously in recent years have changed dramatically. Not that energy security, I think, is still a very important aspect, but I think, and I think certainly as working under Secretary Clinton, she had a very balanced approach: energy security, economic development, and environment, and that was reflected, I think, in our strategies at that time. But obviously the Obama administration was very focused on clean energy development, both domestically, internationally, and climate change. And that became even more so under the second term in terms of Secretary Kerry's passion for dealing with this issue and all the efforts, including efforts with China and India and all countries to try to work toward the agreement that was finally done in late 2015 with the Paris Agreement. You know, and a big element of the financing of assistance, not the only element, because I would say there's basically three elements of aid assistance, and that was part of the Global Climate Change Initiative, GGGI. There was the Economic Support Fund that financed security programs in Pakistan, Afghanistan, Jordan, things like that. And then there was the assistance to Eastern Europe in the former Soviet European countries, and which were funded from a different account than the DA funds, that development assistance funds that finance most of the GGGI. I think the other important thing is what I don't mention here, but is important, is that Obama was very focused on Africa, and one of the big initiatives in Africa was called Power Africa. So the need to increase generation capacity, non-nuclear generation capacity in Africa, and to improve the access and availability of electricity to the 50% that don't have electricity. So that was a very important driver, as I'll talk next. Obviously, we know what's happened with the new administration. And because of during that period, I think the U.S. position in the global energy economy has changed so radically in terms of the shale revolution in oil and gas and the U.S. emergence as an exporter of both LNG and oil, as well as actually increases in coal exports this year. And of course, the emphasis on fossil fuels has been very significant, even though I think if you look at the national security strategy that came out in December, it doesn't specifically say fossil fuels, but it's obviously exporting efforts to export LNG and oil and coal, to work with our allies. In a lot of the meetings that President Trump has had with allies, has talked about their interest in buying U.S. LNG. Interesting that they kept universal energy access in there, which was one of the elements of the Obama strategy, and where we worked with the UN, World Bank, and others in developing the Sustainable Energy for All initiative and the SDG 7 for the Sustainable Development Agenda that was approved also in late 2015. And then, obviously, it's interesting looking at the technological side, the interest in trying to keep our advancing the technological development, America's edge in this area, if you can say that. And there it specifically mentions work on advanced nuclear reactors, which was interesting as So we have a range of agencies that work on this. Actually, I didn't include DOE on this because a lot of the DOE programs have been funded by state and AID over the years. Some that you know that, Dan, from your work with Latin America Bureau and others, as well as programs like the Clean Energy Ministerial, which is a big emphasis, the cooperative programs with China, you know well.
The CERC programs.
Yeah. So a lot of programs have been financed, but DOE really doesn't have a big international program assistance budget. Although there's a lot of bilateral energy collaboration efforts on a formal level with state and DOE. Some are part of broader economic dialogues and include energy. Others are more specific bilaterals and DOE memorandums of cooperation. This is a little hard to see, but aid is the largest. So in the paper I'm doing, I'm breaking it down between technical assistance, capital assistance, energy technology cooperation, and promotion of trade and investment. Because I'm including all of that in a broader bucket of cooperative activities to get a handle on what the overall level of involvement is. And aid is the largest sort of source of technical assistance. And numbers are difficult to come up with, but I conclude that, and I'll talk about funding in a minute, but there's a lot of programs dealing with precisely the things that Title V tells us to do. Energy assessments, both on the overall planning side as well as resource side, trade facilitation, technical exchanges, etc. We haven't really done a scientific Peace Corps, although we have a lot of technical cooperation, and under the, remember, non-Lugar, which was we had a lot of what was called lab-to-lab partnership between Russian and U.S. institutions. So I've broken down sort of the energy types of projects into energy reform, renewables and energy efficiency. The whole clean energy area has been very major emphasis of aid, technical support, energy access, utility performance, improving electricity systems, looking at grids and utility operations and how to integrate renewables into those grids. So those have all been centerpieces of the program. Programs in Pakistan, Jordan, and have included capital assistance elements, that is project financing for actual hydro plants or rehabilitation of combined cycle in Pakistan, et cetera, transmission, building of transmission facilities. But really, in terms of capital assistance, MCC really has emerged in recent years as the largest source of capital assistance. MCC, the Millennium Challenge Corporation.
Public conversion.
MCC took a lot of the economic functions out of AID, which I think I have mixed feelings about. And they had done compacts with countries around the world based on their meeting of certain criteria in terms of progress in both institutional, political, social, etc.
And I'd say for better or worse, make you a comment, with projects that have a sunset from day one.
Yeah, limited time
limited
frame.
Duration.
Right. Although I would say aid programs over the years have become shorter in duration than because of political
I agree.
expediencies and desires for results. We used to do 10-year institutional development programs like the Technology Institute in Bandung in Indonesia, for instance. Okay, so MCC has developed a large capital program, but they've also given more attention recently on technical assistance and reforms, and that's good for my stuff. Overseas Private Investment Corporation is another major player in this process. they've been around since '71, so they're not new. But I would say that under Obama, there was a big focus on renewable energy investment, although they finance gas thermal power plants and other non-renewable activities. And that was their pledge of $1.5 billion in financing and insurance for Africa as part of the Power Africa Presidential Initiative. That was, they have met that and has been a major effort. Likewise with the Trade and Development Agency, that financing feasibility studies, trade mission, reverse trade mission, things like that, to focusing on U.S. exports rather than so much in terms of investment, but U.S. exports of goods and services. And so they did about 30 million, and it's a small agency with a $75 million a year budget, and it's only they spent 30 million last year on on energy. Mm-hmm. And consistent with the new administration's emphasis on LNG, they've just developed a major new initiative on LNG exports to try to help countries prepare for LNG imports and the infrastructure requirements for that. I won't talk about Exim Bank. Exim Bank has been a big disappointment. It's been a political hot potato on the Hill for years. They formerly financed a lot of both petroleum as well as power loan guarantees and financing, and but they've been hamstrung by the politics and the lack of a quorum on the board. And it's going to be interesting. Budget for Trump's budget in '78 and 18 proposed the elimination of both OPIC and TDA. But there's been a change of heart on that, and now they're talking about a new agency, new development finance agency and FY19 budget that would mix or would bring together AIDS Development and Credit Authority, which is a loan guarantee program for local banks and enterprises, and OPIC mandate for insurance and financing. So that's the array. All of these were very much involved in the Power Africa, which was a whole of government initiative that was, I think, which was modeled to some extent on a program called PEPFAR, which was one of the health initiatives that came initially out of Bush's emphasis on HIV/AIDS and the whole health area, which health has grown enormously in terms of financing and really equals or if not exceeds financing for both ESF and DA economic activities. But anyway, that Power Africa program was quite well received. It received Congress bipartisan support under the Electrify Africa Act, and that seems to be holding up okay, and we'll see what happens in terms of funding, in terms of the FY18 appropriations. But my best calculation right now is looking at 16 data, is that overall aid, MCC, OPIC, TDA, state has small technical assistance programs and support for some of the multilateral activities. There's about 2.5 billion in 2016. Looks like from the preliminary 17 numbers that that's gone down for about $500 million. But I'm still checking those numbers, and AID's not able to give me 17 numbers yet. So the study's not meant to do analysis of the effectiveness of our assistance in our program. So that would be a big task, Henry, if we wanted to look at that issue.
Was that required by law?
No, it's not required.
So I don't.
I think that it's not an insignificant amount of money that goes into this area. I mean, my candid impression is that there has been, to some extent, a quote proliferation of countries and small programs. So it's not as focused as it could be, to have some of the real systemic effects that we're trying to get in terms of changing the power, in really accelerating reform and creating the investment strategies and investment climate that's going to be necessary to meet the needs. And remember, developing country growth in energy is going to be very significant. Almost all, then you may have some views on this, but almost all of future primary energy growth is going to be in developing countries.
That's right.
Power is going to be 60–70% of that. So there's going to be huge needs for investments in the trillions of dollars. So the choices they make on nuclear versus non-nuclear is going to be critical. And I think in that context, the big factor is, of course, China. $140 billion in energy and power financing in 60.